Most people see a Hell's Angel in a parking lot, and they step around him. They see danger. They see trouble. They see someone to cross the street for. They make that calculation in under 2 seconds, and then they move on with their day without a second thought. Because that is what the world has taught them to do when a man in a cut covered in patches walks past. That is what the world teaches. That is what the world repeats, over and over, until it feels like fact. But on a Tuesday morning in early October, in Harlan, Kentucky, when the mountains were just starting to go red and the air smelled like wood smoke and coming rain, a 17-year-old boy with a dragging left leg saw something no one else in that town had bothered to look for. He saw a man who was stranded. The boy's name was Danny Pruitt. He had been standing outside the Harlan County Employment Office for 45 minutes before it opened, second in line behind a retired coal miner who would not look at him. He had a ROSM in a manila folder that he had printed at the library the day before. He had polished his one pair of dress shoes with a rag that morning before his mother was awake. He had rehearsed, in the mirror, the sentences he would say when someone finally asked him to sit down. He never made it through the door. What he did instead would start a chain of events that not one person in Harlan County saw coming. And before it was over, the men who had been laughing would stop laughing entirely. The town of Harlan sits at the bottom of a valley in Harlan County, deep in the coal country of eastern Kentucky, the kind of place that appears on a map as a small dot between two ridgelines and feels, when you are standing in it, exactly like that. The mountains hold the valley in from every direction. The sky above Main Street is a narrow corridor of whatever the weather has decided to send. On that Tuesday in October, it had decided on a low gray ceiling and a wind that came down off Pine Mountain in cold gusts that smelled like pine needles and wet stone. The employment office shared a building with a tax preparation service and a bail bondsman on the ground floor of a brick building that had originally been a dry goods store in 1948. The linoleum inside was still close to its original pattern. The chairs in the waiting area were plastic and bolted to a metal rail, the way airport chairs are bolted, as though someone had once decided that the people who came here could not be trusted to arrange their own seating. There was a bulletin board near the door covered in job postings, and it had not been fully updated since August. Someone had written "Call First" in red marker across most of them. The gravel lot beside the building was the first thing you saw when you came around the corner off 3rd Street. And that Tuesday morning it held 3 vehicles: a Ford pickup with a cracked windshield, a compact car with an expired registration sticker, and a motorcycle that was not moving anywhere. The motorcycle was a 1978 Harley-Davidson Shovelhead, candy apple red with chrome, that had been maintained with something close to devotion, and the man sitting beside it on the curb was not maintaining anything at the moment. He was sitting with his forearms across his knees and his helmet on the ground beside him, and he was looking at the front end of the bike the way a man looks at a problem he has turned over 17 times and cannot turn one more time into a solution. Burl Mackey was 61 years old and had not asked for help from a stranger in the better part of a decade. He was 6'3" and 240 pounds of a life that had not been careful with him. And when he had pulled into the lot 40 minutes ago, the 2 men smoking outside the employment office had immediately found reasons to be somewhere else. His cut was black leather, the Hell's Angel's death head on the back, worn to a particular softness that takes years to earn. The patches on the front, representing a history he did not explain to people who had not lived it. He had been riding from Pikeville since before dawn, heading down toward Johnson City for a chapter gathering, and the front brake line had started weeping fluids somewhere on Route 119, and now it was weeping openly into the gravel, and the bike was not going anywhere until that changed. He had called the one shop in Harlan he knew the name of, and been put on hold for 6 minutes before the call disconnected. He was a man who had ridden through worse than this. He was also a man who was going to miss the beginning of something that mattered to him. And that small, specific frustration was sitting in his chest like a coal. He did not notice the boy until the boy was already crouching beside the front wheel. Before we get to what Danny Pruitt said when Burl Mackey looked up and found a teenager with a dragging leg studying his brake line, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where this story travels. Harlan, to wherever you are reading this right now. Drop your city. Drop your state. Drop your country if you are watching from somewhere else in the world. I read every single one. Now, back to that gravel lot. Back to Danny. Because what happened in the next few minutes would change both their lives, and it started with something nobody in Harlan would have predicted. Danny Pruitt had been born with a condition called hemiplegic cerebral palsy. Mild enough that he could walk unassisted, and severe enough that his left leg swung outward and forward rather than straight, producing a gait that people had been imitating behind his back since 3rd grade. He was 17. He was 5'8" on the side that cooperated. And his face was the kind of face that is still deciding what it is going to look like in 10 years. Sharp jaw, dark eyes. A watchfulness that came from a childhood spent reading rooms before entering them. He had been watching the motorcycle since he arrived. He could not help it. He had grown up in his Uncle Gerald's garage on a dirt road off Route 38, and his Uncle Gerald had restored 3 Harley Sportsters over 15 years and talked about each of them the way men in other families talked about their children. Danny could identify a shovelhead engine by sound at a distance of 200 feet. He had been able to do this since he was 11. He had spent 800 hours in that garage while other boys his age were at football practice. And what he had lost in social fluency he had rebuilt entirely in mechanical literacy, and those 2 facts had followed him like a matched pair into every room he had tried to enter since. The employment office had been the 3rd place he had tried that month. The first had been a garage on Cumberland Avenue, where the owner had watched Danny walk from the door to the counter, and then told him, without asking a single question about his experience, that the position had been filled that morning. The second had been an auto parts store where a man named Clive had interviewed him for 11 minutes and said he would call by Friday, and had not called. Danny had the manila folder with him now as a kind of discipline, a reminder to himself that he had things to offer, written down, provable, but he had stopped expecting the folder to do much work. He had not, however, stopped looking at broken things. The brake line was weeping from a fitting near the caliper. He could see it from 15 feet away. He recognized the fitting. His Uncle Gerald had replaced an identical fitting on the 2nd Sportster in the fall of Danny's 13th year. And Danny had handed him the tools and watched and then done the research afterward on his own to understand exactly what had failed and why. He had that kind of mind. He always had. He walked over. He did not announce himself. He crouched beside the wheel the way his uncle had taught him. Low, stable, weight distributed. The bad leg extended to the side as it always was, and he looked at the fitting for 4 seconds. "It's the banjo bolt," he said. "Crush washer's gone." Burl Mackey looked up slowly. Danny did not look at the man. He was still looking at the fitting. "You got a parts store in this town?" he asked. Burl Mackey had not become the man he was by being caught off guard. He had ridden 40 years across roads that had tried to kill him, had been in rooms with men whose intentions were not good, had sat across tables from people who wanted things from him that he was not prepared to give. And in all of that time, he had developed a particular skill for reading situations before they developed. He did not read situations by how they looked. He read them by how they felt. The boy beside his wheel felt like nobody's problem but his own. Odell's, Burl said. 3 blocks north. I know it, Danny said. He stood, slowly, and the motion of standing showed Burl the leg, the particular way the left side compensated, and Burl watched this the way he watched most things, without comment, without expression, taking it in. Banjo bolt and a crush washer, Danny said. It's a 10 millimeter. Probably have it in stock. Probably, Burl said. Danny stood there for another moment. I could go get it, he said, and put it in, if you want. I know the fitting. Burl looked at him for a long time. Not suspicious, evaluating why, he said. Danny glanced at the employment office and back. I got time, he said. The man at the counter at the employment office was named Phil Denton. He had been at that counter for 11 years. He had a way of looking at people who came in that told you, before they sat down, how much of his attention they were going to receive. And when Danny Pruitt had come through the door on 2 previous occasions that fall, Phil Denton had given him the look that meant not much. Danny had applied for a data entry position and a warehouse logistics position. Both times, Phil Denton had reviewed his application and asked questions that had nothing to do with data entry or warehouse logistics, and everything to do with whether Danny could perform the physical requirements of a job that had no physical requirements. Both times, Danny had answered carefully. Both times, Phil Denton had said the same thing. They would be in touch. They had not been in touch. There was a 3rd position posted that Tuesday. A parts runner for a small fleet maintenance company based out of the county industrial park. It was minimum wage and part-time, and it required a valid driver's license, which Danny had, and a clean driving record, which he had, and the ability to lift 30 pounds repeatedly, which he could do, and nothing else. It was exactly the kind of job Danny had been looking for. It was the job he had come in for. Phil Denton had reviewed the application for the parts runner position while Danny was at Odell's Hardware 2 blocks north, buying a banjo bolt and a crush washer with $4.37 from his wallet. By the time Danny returned to the gravel lot, the manila folder tucked under his arm, Phil Denton had moved Danny's application to the bottom of the stack without making a note in the system. He had done this the way he did most things, efficiently, without drama, already thinking about lunch. He had not asked Danny a single question. He did not see himself as the villain of any story. Danny came back to the lot in 11 minutes. He had the parts in a small brown bag. He set the manila folder on the seat of the Harley, which made Burl Mackey tilt his head very slightly. And then Danny crouched beside the wheel again and got to work. He did not perform the work. He simply did it. There was a specificity to how his hands moved that had nothing to do with showing off. It was the specificity of someone who had done this, or something close to this, enough times that the motion had settled into the body. He bled the line first. He removed the weeping fitting. He cleaned the seat with a rag from his jacket pocket that was already there, because he was the kind of person who kept a rag in his jacket pocket. He fitted the new bolt and the new crush washer and torqued them by feel, and then bled the line again and squeezed the lever twice, checking the resistance. He stood. That'll hold, he said. Burl had been watching him for the full 11 minutes without a word. What do I owe you? He said. $4.37, Danny said. For the parts. Burl's eyes went to the manila folder on the seat. Then to Danny. Then to the employment office across the lot. They hire you, Burl said. It was not quite a question. Danny looked at the folder. Then he shook his head once. Not yet, he said. Burl Mackey paid the $4.37, and then he sat on the curb for another 2 minutes, which surprised Danny, who had expected the man to be gone already. He sat with his forearms on his knees again, looking at nothing in particular, and Danny stood there because it did not seem right to leave while the man was still sitting. "What's in the folder?" Burl said. "Some," Danny said. "What do you want to do?" "Work on cars," Danny said. "Or bikes. Whatever they'll let me work on. Who won't let you?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "So far," he said, "most people." Burl looked at him for a long time. "How old are you?" 17. "You know the fitting," Burl said. "How, my uncle's shop," Danny said. "Grew up there. What else do you know?" Danny told him. He did not list it with enthusiasm. He listed it the way you list the contents of a room you have lived in for years. Valve adjustments. Carburetor rebuilds. Ignition timing. Primary chains. Primary seals. He mentioned the second Sportster and the specific problem with the primary cover gasket that had taken 2 attempts and a different sealant compound to solve. He mentioned the third Sportster, which his uncle had never finished, which was sitting now under a tarp in the garage on Route 38, which Danny had been working on alone on weekends for the past 8 months, because his uncle had taken a fall the previous spring and could not crouch anymore. Burl Mackey listened to all of it without expression. He stood up. He put on the helmet. "Give me the folder," he said. Danny handed it over. Burl folded it once and put it inside his cut, against his chest. "I'm going to make a call," Burl said. "Don't go anywhere." He took out his phone and walked to the far end of the lot. Nobody in that gravel lot understood what was about to happen. Not the 2 men who had come out to smoke again and were watching from the employment office steps. Not the woman in the compact car who had just come back from inside with a look that said she had not gotten what she came for. And certainly not Phil Denton at his counter, who was no longer thinking about Danny Pruitt at all. And then the sound started. It was low at first, a vibration more than a sound, the kind of thing you feel in your chest before your ears have identified it. Danny heard it first because he was standing in the open and he had grown up with that sound, and his head came up the way a dog's head comes up, reading the air. Then he saw the headlights. Far down 3rd Street, still a half-mile away, blinking through the trees where the road curved around the base of the ridge. Not 1 set. Not 2. He counted silently until he lost count. Burl Mackey walked back across the lot and stopped beside him. "Chapter meeting doesn't start until 2, Burl said. "I told them I was delayed." Danny looked at him. "How many did you call?" he said. "Enough," Burl said. The first 3 came around the corner together, wide, low, chrome catching the flat October light, and they pulled into the lot without rushing, the way a train pulls into a station. Then 6 more. Then a dozen. The gravel crunched and popped under 40 years of combined engineering, and the air in the lot changed, the cold gusts off the mountain meeting something warmer, something that smelled like exhaust and cold leather and long roads. They kept coming. 43 motorcycles filled the lot of the Harlan County Employment Office on the first Tuesday in October. The 2 men on the steps had stopped moving entirely. Phil Denton had come to the window and was looking out with an expression that his face did not have a category for. They killed their engines one by one, and the silence came in like a tide. And in that silence, Harlan, Kentucky, held its breath. A man dismounted near the front of the formation. He was older than most of them, heavy-set, with a gray beard that had been trimmed that morning with some precision and eyes that moved over the lot the way a man's eyes move when he has spent a long time being responsible for the people around him. His name was Webb Castor. He had been riding with Burl Mackey for 22 years. He walked across the lot without hurrying, and when he reached Burl, he did not say hello first. He looked at Danny. "This the boy," he said. "This is Danny Pruitt," Burl said. Webb Castor looked at Danny the way Burl had looked at him, directly, without performance. "Burl says you know engines," Webb said. "Yes, sir," Danny said. Webb looked at the bike. Then, back at Danny. "He also says you fixed his brake line with your own money and told him 437 was all he owed you." Danny said nothing. "I got a shop in Johnson City," Webb said. "Been looking for a guy for 8 months. Someone who can actually work, not just someone who needs a job to put on a form." He paused. "Burl says you're the first person he's met in a long time who touched his bike before they asked what was in it for them." The wind came down off Pine Mountain and moved through the lot, and the chrome caught what was left of the morning light. Danny was still holding the manila folder receipt bag from Odell's Hardware. "I'm 17, he said. "And I gotta." He stopped. "I know," Webb said. "You got a limp. I got a bad shoulder and 3 fused vertebrae, and Burl over there has ridden 40 years on a knee that was wrecked in 1987 and never fixed right. You know engines, or you don't. Burl says you do." He reached into his vest and took out a card and held it out. "Call that number Monday morning," Webb said. "I'll have a spot cleared." Phil Denton came outside 9 minutes after the motorcycles arrived. He had been watching from the window long enough to understand that something had shifted in the order of the morning, and he came out with his clipboard in the way people carry clipboards when they want to look occupied. He looked at the 43 motorcycles and then at Danny Pruitt standing in the middle of them next to Burl Mackey and Webcaster. He said Danny's name. Then, when Danny looked at him, he said that he had been reviewing the applications, and he thought the parts runner position might actually be a good fit, and he wondered if Danny would want to come back inside. The lot was very quiet. Danny looked at Phil Denton for a long moment. He thought about the 2 previous visits. He thought about the questions that it had nothing to do with data entry. He thought about the stack of applications and where his had been placed within it. "I got something else," Danny said. Phil Denton looked at the 43 Hells Angels in his parking lot and at Danny Pruitt holding a business card from Johnson City. He went back inside. Burl Mackey put his helmet on. "You need a ride somewhere," he said to Danny. "I got my truck," Danny said. "Then go home," Burl said. "Get some sleep. Monday morning you call that number, and you show up and you work." He swung onto the shovelhead. The engine turned over on the first kick, settling into its idle, smooth and steady with the new fitting holding clean. He looked at Danny one more time. "Good on the brake line," he said. Then, he pulled forward, and the formation parted around him, and he rolled out onto 3rd Street and headed south toward the highway. One by one, 42 more engines turned over. And the sound built again in the lot until it was something you could feel in the bones of the building, in the linoleum and the plastic chairs, and the bulletin board with its outdated postings. And then they went, pulling out in formation, chrome and leather, disappearing around the curve at the base of the ridge, the sound fading the way thunder fades, slowly, reluctantly, carrying long. The lot was empty again in under 3 minutes. Danny Pruitt stood in it alone. He looked at the card in his hand. Johnson City Auto and Cycle. Webcaster, proprietor. He read it twice. He put it carefully in the manila folder, which he was still carrying, which now had a purpose it had not had that morning. He walked to his truck, a 2003 F-150 with 217,000 miles and a serpentine belt that needed replacing, which he had been putting off, and he sat in it for a moment, without starting it. He thought about the 3rd Sportster under the tarp on Route 38. He thought about calling his uncle. He thought about the brake line, the banjo bolt, the crush washer. $4.37 of parts and 40 years of work his uncle had quietly given him. The patient, repetitive gift of showing a boy how things went together, rather than letting the boy sit in the corner and watch. It had not felt like anything at the time. It had just felt like being in the garage. He started the truck and drove home through the mountains. 3 weeks later, he was in Johnson City on a Tuesday, 40 hours a week. And by the end of the month, Webcaster had told 2 men from other chapters that if they needed engine work done right and done honest, there was a kid in his shop who knew shovelheads the way most people know their own names. Danny Pruitt had not been looking for charity. He had been looking for someone to look at what he could do instead of how he walked to get there. He had been looking for that his whole life. It arrived on a Harley. It always does. If this story reached you, if you believe that the right person in the right moment can change everything, share it with someone who needs a reminder that talent finds its way. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Have you ever been written off by someone who never bothered to ask what you were capable of? Tell me. I read every single one.